Good evening. We are glad that you've joined us for what we hope is an informative, informal opportunity to share some information, some ideas to gain your prayer, even to entertain some questions and comments that you may have. And we have not had this opportunity because of the way we've needed to meet. And so we're trying to think, how can we try to do all we can to communicate? And I have felt the need here these last days to get out in front of the truck rather than be behind it. And so that's why we organized our meeting tonight here and are hoping to communicate a number of informational items, give you opportunity to ask questions. And Pastor Jason is going to review some instructions as to how you can text us or in the chat box be able to send us questions or comments.
Yeah, we do. We welcome your questions. We had thought about maybe posting a video and just having you watch that, but we did want some interaction along the way. You may have questions, and so feel free to use the chat box right there on YouTube where you're watching, and we're getting those, as well as if you'd like, if you want to text your questions, you can use this number. We don't have it on the screen, so I'll say it twice. 599-0174. Of course, that's a 515 number. 599-0174. Maybe I'll put that numbers. I guess it's already in the chat, but yeah, use the YouTube chat to ask questions and interact with that with us. We do welcome that, or text them, and we'll try to answer as many as possible.
Okay, we'll try to be as concise as possible to not belabor your time. And most are aware that Monday, Governor Reynolds came with a statement that gave allowance for religious gatherings to be made possible, and opened that up across all 99 counties, knowing that there were some counties that were not included in some of her directives. So Tuesday morning, we met for virtually all morning and then in and out through the day to try to decide what would be best to do as far as if and when to begin holding Sunday ministries on site, and really wade through that. And so the cutting to the short issue of the matter, that we have for the moment decided to continue to hold our Sunday ABC at Home ministry for at least the next 2 weeks. Quite possibly, we think that we may need to do that longer, and we'll continue to monitor and assess how the COVID-19 virus is spreading. We'll carefully listen to the directives that are given daily by the governor, also by medical authorities. And part of the reasoning, if I were to share the reasoning why we're not immediately opening up our ministries on site on Sundays, is that part of Governor Reynolds' rationale was that it was not on the basis of health issues or that we're all free and clear regarding the COVID-19 virus, but rather her concern for First Amendment rights and religious freedom, and that churches should be free to pursue what they deem acceptable for themselves as a church ministry. So when we started to assess things, I, of course, leaned heavily upon Pastor Jason and Pastor Brad. We involved first Dave Parrott as chairman of the deacons, and then last evening we had a fairly lengthy session with the deacons with our online meeting. I talked to an area pastor. Greg Baker at the Family Leader was helpful with a number of ideas that he was thinking through. And throwing that all into the pot and then seeking wisdom from God, we really felt that based upon the spike in both the number of people who have contracted the virus as well as the deaths that occurred just this week, that we felt that it was best for us to delay any immediate opening of ministries on Sunday, that we would err on the side of caution, and that we will assess it on a weekly basis. And as I mentioned to you, we have decided that at least for the next 2 weeks, we will continue our ABC at Home ministry, and then we will assess that. And I think in our deacons meetings last night, we were trying to steel ourselves in a sense that depending on how the course of the virus goes, it may indeed be longer. And admittedly, even the nature in the form of ministry not merely across the next weeks, but rather across the next months, will likely be quite different. And we have to emotionally just prepare ourselves for a bit of the longer haul rather than thinking about immediately moving back into normal life and routine as we knew it pre-COVID-19. So I'll give some more detail here in a bit, but it might be helpful for Pastor Brad and Pastor Jason to address some of their particular areas of ministry. So Pastor Brad, why don't you jump in regarding our 1024 Care Ministry?
Yep. So for now, we're planning to continue what we've been doing with our 1024 groups, and so just having those weekly meetings. We are trying to assess what that looks like going forward. Typically, our groups would wrap up around mid-May, is usually how the rhythm goes. But for now, we're going to continue with our weekly meetings, and we'll be assessing that just like all of these things. We'll be assessing that kind of week by week as we look at what things develop from our government and what kind of plans we are making for our church as a whole. But we want to continue to use that as a way for us as a church family to continue connecting and encouraging one another during this time. So as we get here a couple weeks down the road, we'll look again and see if that's the rhythm we continue with our 1024 groups or if we switch some other things around, but for now we'll keep the same rhythm.
Yeah, in which I would say, I was mentioning to the deacons last night how important the 1024 Care Ministry has been to maintain that connection, and that's been very positive, and many people have spoken to me about that. And I just want to share my appreciation for all of the 1024 Care leaders and Pastor Brad's oversight of that ministry.
Good.
Chief, go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to kind of follow the lead of our other ministries and what Pastor's already spoken about, holding off any change in what we have been doing. So for youth ministry, we're looking at the next 2 Wednesdays of continuing to meet online and then also meeting in Zoom for small groups. And that's been really effective. We've had great involvement. I think everybody's ready to be back together, but we've been able to stay connected. And so for the next 2 weeks, we'll continue to meet online and then evaluate after that and see where we're at just here in our state and our government and those regulations.
Okay, and while we're walking through things, if you've got questions or comments, go ahead and fire those our way, and we'll try to leave opportunity to answer as many of those. The crazy ones we'll throw out, like if Mark Blunk sends in a crazy one, we'll just throw that out. Duplicates, we'll try to merge them, so you can help us by doing that.
Our very first question is wanting to know what kind of socks that we're wearing. So that's really pressing. I was prepared. I even had my shoe ready here of just ready to go.
I have to say a couple things about that. These guys have no game, first of all. But second of all, I was embarrassed when I walked in and realized how boring my socks are tonight. They really don't meet up.
Church family. You wouldn't believe the amount of trash talk that was thrown Pastor Brad and I's way on Tuesday. Just want to make that public. There is an actual serious question. I don't know if you want to take any of those yet or lay out a few more things and then come back to some of those.
Let me lay out a couple more things, then we'll go to the questions. First of all, and I think Pastor Jason mentioned this, how really we ache to be able to have the opportunity to meet together. And so the decisions we've made, they've been made really with care and concern. I continually boast to others outside of our church of how well the church has been doing during this very unique time of ministry. The unity has been fabulous. And one of the concerns we had when walking through this and then hearing the governor giving permission for churches to meet on site, we were really concerned that we maintain our unity together. We know that people will approach the issue of the COVID-19 virus differently, and we're trying to find the balance and have care for our community, concern for the reputation in our community, to be able to be wise. I do think that we are free as a church to exercise our First Amendment rights when we are free to be responsible as well. And I think I want to use that freedom and use that wisely when we're making some of these kind of decisions. I think it's appropriate to give a due submission to our governmental authorities and to give respect for them. I personally been praying for Governor Reynolds, for our state leaders, and for our national leaders, for Vice President Pence as he really leads the effort to address the COVID-19 virus. And so we're really appealing to our church family to pray, to maintain that unified purpose, that heart for what we are trying to accomplish in and through our church ministry. I have a longer letter that I'm planning to send out tomorrow that will detail some of the things that we've shared tonight. It will be far longer in detail, that you may find it worthwhile to read. I would just encourage you to do that. I have some more specifics we'll share. Even we have thought about some eventual transitional steps back into ministry when we are able to meet, and we've begun to think through logistics and appropriate process there. But we'll share that to the end, and perhaps we can segue to questions.
Yeah, we've got a question here that I think probably many are wondering. It's in relationship to our small group, and just asking, can 1024 groups meet together outside somewhere while distancing, maybe even dividing our small group into two smaller groups for in-person fellowship outside? And you know, we've talked about that. I don't know how you'd want to handle that.
Because we've talked about it. Why don't you go ahead and...
Yeah, obviously, we have the 10-person limit that we've always had all along, and so those gatherings have always been okay as far as what has been put forward by our government. Obviously, some of the issues that come in there is just the level of comfort of everybody. Would everybody be comfortable doing that? Can you do it in a way that still is adhering to the social distancing that they're asking us to do even when we gather in groups? And if someone isn't comfortable, is there a way for them to still be a part of meeting together? And so I think there's a number of factors that you want to consider there. If you can do that, if your group can be under the size of 10, you can practice the social distancing, everybody that wants to be a part is able to be a part, then those are things that we're okay with you kind of making that decision as a group. But we just want to make sure that we're really careful to very careful to follow everything that's been put forward. We wouldn't want to in any way compromise the name of the Lord by doing something that goes against what we've been asked to do. And we want to be really sensitive to everybody in our church, making sure that we're not putting anybody in an awkward position if they're not wanting to gather, that it doesn't make that awkward for them. So. And
the only other couple things I would add would be communicate what you're doing to Pastor Brad, so that's just helpful for accountability. And then if your group has young children, that's another factor that you have to think on, because adults are better at social distancing, where our children, when they get together with other children, that will be a difficulty. So I think that is a factor that you have to think through. Now, our group really has only 2 children that Debbie and I are part of. So we don't have the difficulty that some other groups do who do have more children.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's been key in your letter that they'll receive tomorrow via email really emphasizes just the value of unity as we approach this, recognizing that even amongst our church family there's a variety of opinions about all of COVID-19, and to the small group question, that we wouldn't want to lose a couple people to a group because they weren't comfortable. And so just like you said, Pastor Brad, of just keeping in mind the, first of all, health and safety of one another, but also just the good of everyone, and being willing to sacrifice what you desire for the health of everybody.
Yeah, and I think, even as we've looked at our ministries, on the point of the children's side of things, Pastor, that you mentioned, we just don't see a way for us to do those children's ministries and have that social distancing. So that would have a significant impact on your small group. If you have children as a part of your group, I'm not sure of a way that you could get together with the children coming together too and still have social distancing. So just all those things to keep in mind. And feel free to contact us, please, anytime, and talk through things with us, so that we can be a listening ear and try and give advice and kind of think out loud together with you as you're thinking through some of those things.
A couple other questions that have been tossed in that I think would be relevant to discuss here. This first one, as we transition back to being together here on site, wondering what that will look like for nursery and children's ministries. I don't know if we've touched on that yet
No, I
tonight.
haven't.
If you
And
want to go there, and then I've got
I
another
can-
one after that.
I can answer that question, and Pastor Brad has really alluded to that, that when we do resume ministries, we don't think that we can hold our normal children's ministries just because of the nature of children and the absolute impossibility of creating social distance between all of our children. So we have decided, for example, that Awana clubs will not be held prior to fall ministry. So our Awana ministry is done for the year except for a potential online award ceremony. When we do resume on-site ministries, we will not provide a nursery immediately. We will not have children's worship services. There will not be Sunday school classes for children. And so when we're thinking through that, we know that that will be really different. Just to even further share our ideas, what we're thinking on, that when we do hold a worship service on site, that we would still need to maintain, so that family groups would maintain a 6-foot distance from other family groups. And so we are working on a system so that we will know exactly who's coming to church, that we would set up the auditorium with our modular seating, likely in a way that sets them up in family groupings, each 6 feet apart. And we would need to style the service a lot like we're doing now with our ABC at home, due to the attention span of some of the 0-year-olds that we would have in the service, as well as old-timers like me who are there. And so we would need to alter that service. So it would be those, especially those early opportunities, would be quite different. But we also sense the value of doing that together. And even in arriving and dismissing, we would need to set a flow of people so that there would be the limitation of physical contact, both with each other as well as even door handles and that kind of thing. Being able to spread out when we greet each other, both in the auditorium foyer and perhaps outside. So, and I know those are very unusual things, but quite literally, we just don't believe that there is any ability for us to immediately have ministries for children apart from their presence in their families due to the inability to keep them apart. And we know that that may limit some people who feel that it would be better for them to watch remotely in their homes as opposed to being on site. And we understand that. As much as we understand that people at risk, they're still being advised to not mix socially. And so people who are at risk, either by age or by healthcare conditions, it's likely that they would need to view our service remotely as opposed to being right on site. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to work through. And I know that, again, finding that balance, some would say, oh, that's foolhardy, and others would say, well, we can't meet until there's a vaccine available. We're trying to find what that appropriate balance is so that we can be able to be present together and be together as families to really have that opportunity to interact with each other.
I've got a couple maybe just questions that might follow up to some of the things you're just saying. There's been a couple questions about when we get back together. Have we thought about the idea of 2 services as we phase back into things? I don't know if you want to address that, and then maybe even speak of what Core 1. I don't know that have we talked yet on Core 1?
And one of you guys can address Core 1. And really, you guys can talk to these as well. But we have talked about 2 possibilities about holding a 9 o'clock service and an 11 o'clock service. They would be identical. We'd need to keep them apart so that people could leave. Having 2 services would require a in-between crew of people to clean surfaces, and so that logistically would be a challenge. We've also thought about asking people through a MailChimp sign-up to let us know that they're coming to the 9 a.m. service, the 11 a.m. service. When the 9 a.m. service is full, you can't come to that. You got to come to the 11 a.m. service. We've also talked about, depending on the number of people that would let us know in advance that they are coming, of setting up the groupings in the auditorium, and then having an overflow in the fellowship hall where we'd have a live stream set up for viewing on a large screen TV, and that is a possibility. So we're not sure exactly which way we're going to go, and we'll figure that out here in coming days as we have a little bit more time to really think through that. And one of you can answer the core one study question.
Yeah, some of that is a timing thing. So if here in a couple weeks we're able to have an on-site service, then we would likely go back to our Core 1 studies being just recorded and uploaded to YouTube. The reason being is that if there were those who were going to try and participate in an online live Zoom Core 1, but then come to the service, that just becomes a difficulty for it to be on home online and then get here in time for the service. And so we'd probably go back to just having them recorded and posted for people to watch. Then if it's goes beyond that and we're still continuing to need to hold our services like in the way that we're describing, and it's going further into the summer, then there's some adjustments that we'll look at there as far as where we could put Core 1 studies and in what format. And again, there's some logistical things of children ministries and all those things. But for the immediate, we would probably just go back to recording and uploading.
Yeah, and I think most of you would understand, and I guess I would plead for your patience, that there are a lot of moving parts, and some of those have not settled in yet. And as we assess things, as we even gain counsel from others, I think we'll be able to chart that and make those floating pieces fit together. But those are some of the ideas that we're now considering.
I think this is a helpful question. A few folks have said, just in light of some things that have been put out through their workplace. Let me get to the right question here. Have we thought through protocol for addressing individuals that are known to have had COVID-19, as in what we would communicate to that person? I don't know if you want to address that one now, or you want to think on that a little bit.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So if we know someone from the church family who has come down with the virus, what would we do by way of communication? I think if I'm understanding that correctly, is that something
with that individual?
Well, it would seem, now to my knowledge, no one in our church family has contracted the COVID-19 virus.
Right.
We do have a number of people, you realize, and this is part of the danger that we're looking at. We have a number of people in the medical professions, medical support staff, people that work in the grocery stores, meeting many people through a day of work, and their exposure is far greater than what yours or mine might be. And I think that we would encourage that if someone contracts or thinks that they have contracted the COVID-19 virus, they need to utilize the different procedures of communication. I think they have set up through the state of Iowa a survey that would qualify you to take a COVID-19 test now, and to seek advice from your primary care physician. But quite obviously, if someone does contract COVID-19 virus, they need to be quarantined. They need to quarantine themselves for the appropriate length of time, and I think that's what we would tell people. And God forbid that occurs, but it's not unlikely that indeed may occur.
Yeah. A question that's been asked that just kind of continues that thought, Pastor, is what are the plans in place to mitigate the risk of outbreak in the church when we do decide to meet again? And I think your letter tomorrow will spell that out in detail, but we would just assure you that, again, we've sought a lot of counsel, and I think health and safety is very high on our priority list, and have tried to lay out specific protocol, even as far as how people, you've already mentioned, even signing up so we know who's coming to church, how we can arrange chairs in the auditorium, how we would even, how you said, have that flow of traffic, and obviously we'd be holding off on our kids ministries, nursery ministry, some of those things. So I think tomorrow's letter will help spell some of those things out. But what would you add to that?
The other things is we'll likely have extra masks on site so that those who may not be comfortable without a mask but may not have one, they would be made available to them. I think that our custodial staff, as well as probably we will be recruiting some volunteers to help, that there will be a heightened level of hygiene with surfaces, with bathrooms, with all those kind of things that would do all we could to prevent the spread of virus, whether it be here on site or through other places.
Yeah, and then again, just to say it again, because I think this applies to so many things that we've talked about, and it certainly is important in the days ahead, that number one, to say it again, health and safety is high on our list, extremely high, as well as what's right beside that of just walking with one another in patience and forbearance. And when it comes to just different viewpoints and ideas, obviously we're not saying be loose with protocol and all, that's not our point at all. But again, there's a variety of very strong opinions with this whole thing. And we just want to walk with patience with one another and while following what our health guidelines and what our government is instructing us. We want to do that. That's our priority, and yet continue to just show the love of Christ to one another and just how we see each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's following those biblical principles that are laid out in so many places in the New Testament for us. You know, many things that talk about our speech, and we want to have interaction and feedback to because that helps us think through, oh yeah, that's a good thing. We haven't thought of that piece or whatever. But to be able to do that with one another in a way that is patient and kind and loving and really puts on display what it looks like for believers to handle stressful situations in a way that looks remarkably different maybe than you would see it in other places. And so just wanting to stress so highly that we not only are greatly concerned for the physical safety of everyone, but for the spiritual safety too, that we would protect one another from divisions and fights and just help one another even in the way that we phrase things as we speak with one another.
Yeah. I want to maybe ask a little bit different question than the area that we just were. A couple of people have asked, what about Vacation Bible School? And I would say that we have a window that is actually quickly closing where we need to make a decision. I know right now our directors have still been planning and organizing as if VBS was going to happen at its normal time. We have a date set in mind where we need to make a decision, and that is coming to us quickly, to just be quite honest. We do have a little bit of Plan B in place, that if our normal June VBS date had to be postponed, we're looking at, again, this is assuming that our restrictions are lifted, we would look at really a 2-day VBS in July, and we have a date on the calendar already for that. And again, the reason why it's not a full week is largely logistic, and I won't get into all the details, but I think our team has done a good job thinking through a lot of things. And so right now, VBS is still on the calendar for June, but our window to make that decision is just about up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you may also want to know that so that we can be prepared, we've gone ahead and purchased VBS materials, presuming that we would be able to use them. If we are not able to use them this year, we'll have spent the money this year and we'll use them next year. So, but we're looking at things to try to be as ready as we can, should we have opportunity to do that. And really, it's one of our stellar ministries. We would all, with great reluctance, cancel or alter the ministry of our Bible school. But it's something that we may need to do. We just have to be careful as we walk through that.
Yeah.
I have a couple other questions, but
Yeah,
if
go
there's
ahead.
other things, and again, we appreciate all the questions, and feel free to continue to share those with us there in the YouTube chat or in the number that we shared earlier. You can text them to us, and we do at the same time want to be sensitive of your time and have a kind of a cap in mind for how long we want to go. But this has been really helpful in how you've asked questions, things like that. Pastor Brad, have we spoken anything about masks? And again, I've been doing a little bit of feedback on YouTube here, so I may have missed if we have spoken about masks and coming on that Sunday whenever we're able to start phasing back.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a little discussion around that, and again, part of it is we're not sure exactly when we'll be able to start having some on-site things. But if that were the case, then obviously all of our greeter, usher people, we would have them in masks, and again, depending on some of the information that's rolled out to us, but would likely encourage people to wear masks, and certainly wouldn't want anybody to feel awkward because they're going to wear a mask. I think it's a wise, safe thing. In fact, I was reading the Hartwick's update just today, and they were speaking of how that was pretty quickly just a norm where they were. They had, of course, had SARS back in the day and learned a lot from that, and so people just quickly went to wearing masks because it's one of the best ways to help protect people. And so we would certainly encourage people to use all of those safety precautions. I don't know, Pastor, if there's anything to add to that. But.
And just to illustrate, in Debbie's office this past week, not only did they mandate the wearing of masks, different levels for the different level of service provided, but then each of them now are wearing shields in order that they could, as much as possible, protect their staff. So it's very likely that we would have a fully masked congregation. If I'm preaching with a mask, if I can be maybe 20 feet away from the first person, I may take the mask off and preach without a mask. That would be so you could see my handsome face, but likely would have many, many, many people with masks.
Yeah.
I got one more.
Go ahead.
All right. Obviously, for our elderly, it's nice for them to get out of the house as they can, given still practicing healthy social distancing. Have we thought about a low power FM transmitter where we could stay in cars but come to the parking lot? I know it's been a discussion multiple times over the last month, and do you care to answer that one, or do you want to?
Why don't you answer? We've talked enough about it.
I think right now we've decided to hold off on that for a number of reasons. And I know this was a question that we got quite a bit as we approached Easter. And again, our hearts is to be together. Clearly, that is our desire. But yet, when you start to think through logistically of getting that many cars on a parking lot that's very slanted, then to not be able to interact with one another, that would have to be there to not interact. Then you start thinking about kids and bathrooms, and perhaps maybe it's a senior saint type service we do in cars. I don't know, but we opted on just the better side of just being safe and using discernment. That initially the idea is like, oh, that sounds pretty cool, but yet knowing that the amount of people that would serve well,
Yeah.
and then just maybe what that would look like to our community. We are on Irvingdale. That is a very main road, and though traffic is less in Ankeny these days, and we're glad for that to some degree, there would still be that of appearance, and again, just trying to love our neighbor well, we opted not to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and just on the more humorous side, we pretty much every week when we meet in staff meeting, we bring in the greatest meme of the week, and one of them had to do with a drive-in service. You guys will have to help me. It was beep for amen.
Yeah,
And,
beat for amen. I think honk your horn for hallelujah,
Okay.
and then run the fluid on your windshield wipers if you want to be baptized.
Okay.
Those were great ideas. Very helpful.
It was a riot. So nothing else by way of questions.
No, but your daughter just suggested that you could preach unmasked from the baptistry.
Yeah,
That's an
right.
idea.
We'll fill it for you.
Yeah, you wear your swim
Yeah,
trunks.
and you understand that we're thinking through a number of things. We have about 12 people that are ready to be baptized.
Mm-hmm.
How do we baptize with transmission and putting 12 people consecutively through a tub of water? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how we do that. We really want to observe communion. That's something we do when we come together. We want to be able to hold a business meeting. And we may have to do a meeting like this where we entertain motions by text. I'm not sure how we do that, but there are a number of different things that can really only occur when we're together. And so we really want to be active in fellowship with one another. So we are as eager as anyone to be able to return to being able to meet on site. I would reiterate what I mentioned at the beginning, that some of the adjustment is going to be a fairly significant alteration of what we're accustomed to. And yet, because we're committed to the body and we're committed to Christ, those will not be difficult things to accommodate. We will just know that this is a different context, a different situation, and I commend the church for. I've likened it. I've said it often. It's like water that always finds its way. If you obstruct water in one place, it'll go somewhere else. And so we've been obstructed from normal ministry, but ministry has flourished and continued in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. And that has been wonderfully encouraging and positive as we have seen the body really in a way that probably should have been functioning prior to that, but now it's really flourished in a number of different ways. And it needs to continue. And in our 1024 groups, we've been trying to make sure that we're remembering to not let our shelter at home bring a bunker mentality or bring a selfish mentality, but to have a ministry of outreach to find ways to connect with your neighbors, with unsaved people, with coworkers, with friends, to reshare our advertisement about our ABC at Home ministry. Put that on your Facebook posts. Invite people to come watch the live stream with you online. Chat with them later about it. Just all kinds of different ways to have a mentality, even when we can't be physically present with those people, to really be able to yet reach out in ministry. So I really want to commend our deacons. Have been doing a great job. Now we have backed off to every other week meetings. We're meeting weekly. We've now begun to meet every other week on Wednesday evenings. But they all have really stepped up to the plate and doubled their efforts in deacon care ministry and in working with 1024 care groups. And that's all been really, really positive.
And I would say we have learned so much over the last 7 weeks. A lot of things that I think have been helpful and some that will help in the long run. And so just as you've suggested a number of ways to just continue to be creative and how we can continue to live out the one another's, so we can't be together, is incredibly helpful. And we the three, and Michelle and others as well have learned so much about just how to do ministry and some things I think that will last. I know we're coming up a little bit on our time window here, a little bit. I don't know if there's other things that we want to address. There's been some helpful other things to consider about having a service out in the parking lot. One suggested that if you pop it in reverse, it's a sign of repentance and coming forward for the message. So that was a really helpful idea.
Yes, if you have your left blinker on, you're departing. If you turn your right blinker on, that's repentance. I'm not sure what the.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we touched on. I see one in here about. Have we thought about using the basement and still have one service when we were talking about two services? That is something that we've talked about. The possibility of streaming downstairs for kind of an overflow, so that we could possibly accommodate all the people that are wanting to come to a service at one time.
And like I said, those things are still fluid. We have not made a firm decision on exactly what our gathering will look like that first, second, third Sunday. We'll work with the custodial staff. We'll figure that out here. We'll talk with deacons and the AMT, and very likely something along that line will be part of that process.
Yeah.
The only other questions that have been asked have been specific to the three of us, as far as what can people do to encourage us and pray for us. And I know whenever we answer that question, it feels a little self-serving, but that's been asked a number of times, as well as the ideas of our car service just continue to roll in. So you may want to go back and
Our what service?
if we did the car service
car
ideas, suggestions continue to roll in that are quite comical. So go back and review those after the fact. You'll appreciate some of these, I think.
Well, you answer first.
That's a hard question to I think answer. We're not the only ones by any stretch who feel m- all of you feel the same as we do in the press of different things because things are different. Just the last 7 weeks have been really, really heavy, to just put it that way. They've been demanding and the hours have been long, and yet God has been so good. And so I think just praying for just strength for us and wisdom for a lot of questions that we don't quite have answers for, and things that will be changing that we'll need to address. And so, not to be cliche, but I think all three of us say, pray for strength and wisdom, and that we just continue to abide with the Lord, just even in our private devotion. So I think those are some things for me right off the bat.
Yeah.
How about you guys?
Yeah, I would echo those things. In fact, I was 2 weeks ago after you spoke on grace. One of the things that we were working at in our 1024 group was what's a grace verse that you need to memorize or meditate on. And so I chose 2 Corinthians 12:9. But my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. In that stretch there, Paul is addressing what seems like a physical weakness, as thorn in the flesh, and I went to that because, like many of you, I was sensing that weariness physically, just from the demand of week after week after week. And so I would say the same thing, just pray for us in that perseverance and in that strength. You mentioned wisdom and discernment as well. And the other one that I'm really praying for right now is just unity for us as a church family.
It's a big one.
And that's, for us as leaders to help promote that. And to pray towards that. This is such a great opportunity for us to shine brightly as God's church and to really put Jesus on display. But it's an opportunity for the devil to grab a foothold and bring division among us and harm the name of Christ. And so the wisdom and unity are kind of been my top two here for the past week now, since the governor came out with her latest information, that God, please help us to make those wise choices, take the right path forward. And please help us as a church to be unified in this so that we continue to accomplish the mission.
And I think even just wisdom to make the decisions at the right pace.
Yep.
Everybody's personality differs when it comes to decision making, and we don't want to drag our feet in certain areas. We don't want to communicate poorly, but we also don't want to make quick, hasty decisions because of the press of what's going on around us and our culture and things like that.
And I would largely echo what Pastor Brad and Pastor Jason have noted. I've used a definition of grace here in the last days, that God's grace is his unilateral intervention in hopeless situations where he acts in a way that only he can act and produce what only he can produce. And it's really interesting in the scriptures how even the book of Titus that I'm again preaching from Sunday, he ends with, may grace be with you. And that is that continuous intervention of God. And this week, to be honest with you, although I did not unilaterally make the decision, I do carry the responsibility of leadership. And you feel that, the weight of that, because you know that there are those who have different ideas, and you try to find the appropriate balance. And so when we're walking through those leadership issues, that's you can pray for both wisdom and strength to be able to wisely guide our staff and to be able to communicate. I'm trying to learn and he's been such an encouragement in different ways, but in the many years that Lanny and I have been friends here at church, he's taught me you can't ever communicate too much. And so we're trying to find all of the various ways we can possibly keep people informed. I have concern for people that exist on the periphery of our church, and I don't want them to fade into oblivion. So we all need to reach out and care for each other. So those are the concerns that I have, and of course I have three in my family who are on the front lines of the medical profession. I have son David working in a retail establishment. So I have a concern not only for my four, but we have multiple people in our church family that are at far greater exposure to things than I am or than you are. And so I think those things you can just pray that together we'll sense God's continued work in our life. I especially am grateful for our church family. There are just so many different ways that God has wonderfully manifested His grace in you folks. I constantly been quoting, Pastor Brad mentioned verses that come to mind when you think of the subject of God's grace, but I've been meditating through 1 Corinthians 15:10, by the grace of God I am what I am, yet not I, but the grace of God was in me, but I labored more abundantly than they all, and it was the grace of God operating in me. And so there's that balance of hard work, and these guys have mentioned it. We probably, it's been different, but we have worked longer and different and harder hours probably during these last 7.5 weeks. I think you guys would agree, than we did before. And we weren't lazy before either. So we carry that load, and yet God's burdens are easy. His load is light, and that is not an arduous thing to do. So we would want to share our thanks to you tonight. I know this is awkward to do this in a video setting through a studio. I just felt we need to talk to our church family, let you know what's going on. We want you informed. I'll send you the letter tomorrow. You can read it, hopefully gain some insight further from that. But we do hope that you have heard our heart for you, our heart for our community. I again speak to myself. Don't let being sheltered at home bring a closed-mindedness to outreach in our community. You know, we pride ourselves in being separatists. Boy, this has made it easy for us. Now we're sequestered at home. Now we can really be separate. We don't have to touch anybody. That's not the way we need to think through things. We need to really think, how can we yet reach out to our friends, to our family? Pastor Jason was mentioning last night with their live video feed through what was it you were
YouTube,
using?
yeah.
YouTube, and that
We get a variety of people that we don't normally do.
The extra people that were jumping onto that was really a neat opportunity for them to hear the gospel of Christ and see young people that wanted to learn. So let's encourage each other. I think that we can safely sign off unless there are last-minute quips or
Nope.
comments.
Well, there's definitely quips, but we probably need to wrap it up.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We're looking forward to Sunday's ministry. We're hoping to rid ourselves of all of the technological gremlins that have occasionally manifested themselves. And we know we love you. We pray for you. And have a good night.